That is true. We have seen Christians being censored, attacked, and ridiculed for mainstream biblical teaching, which is that marriage is between one man and one woman.
Supreme Court rejects a call to overturn the decision on same-sex marriage. 1/3 of college students believe that it's okay to use political violence against people to disagree with. And the BBC leadership resigns over a doctored tape of President Trump, who gave a speech on January 6, 2021. And BBC made it appear like that he called for violence, even though he didn't. We'll talk about all that and more on this week's episode of InFocus. I'm here with political insider and Gen Z influencer Wade Searle, journalist and author Stephen Cox, and myself, Andreas Wilder. Top story of this week probably is the Supreme Court rejecting a case that could overturn Obergefell, meaning the decision that put same-sex marriage into federal law, requiring, basically the federal government to allow same-sex marriage. So this is a big deal, meaning that what many were hoping, that this outrageous decision from about 10 years ago was finally going to be overturned under this new conservative court that we have with a 6-3 conservative majority. But apparently that's not going to happen. What's your take on this, Stephen? Why did the Supreme Court reject this case? And maybe you could go into a little bit about what the case was about that they rejected.
People might recall the name Kim Davis. Kim Davis was a marriage clerk in the state of Kentucky who, over a decade ago, in fact, refused to sign marriage licenses for homosexual couples. She eventually spent some time in jail and yet brought a case that eventually wound up at the Supreme Court, in which 2025 the court ruled in favor of redefining marriage, which is an abomination. Of course, we know about marriages between one man and one woman. They expanded that definition arbitrarily to include same-sex couples without any foundation in reality, of course. So what's happened here is that Kim Davis, who our viewers might remember was actually praised by Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano, the former apostolic nuncio to the United States on behalf of the Vatican, she filed an appeal hoping that the court would once again take up her case and eventually would potentially reverse its previous ruling, seeing, of course, how the Supreme Court in 2022 threw out the Roe v. Wade ruling from far earlier in the 20th century. So the appeal needed at least 4 justices in order to put this appeal case back onto the docket. Now, one would potentially assume that that was a likely outcome, given that the Supreme Court, at least in theory right now, has a 6-3 majority. And given that Justices Alito, Roberts, as well as Thomas in the past, I believe, ruled actually against Obergefell in 2015. But perhaps somewhat surprisingly, that was not granted. And so the court dismissed this appeal without commenting on it, without giving really any specifics as to why. So we're sort of left to wonder, why weren't there at least 4 judges who took an interest in hearing this case? And we know that at least, again, 2, Thomas and Alito, are the most conservative. So you would have thought at least 2 more would have jumped on, including Amy Coney Barrett and or Brett Kavanaugh. Alas, we've been let down yet again by conservatives in office, which pro-lifers and Christian conservatives have too often been let down for decades, it seems, by those in the political right. But in any case, that's the situation, Andreas. And it seems that for now, this abominable ruling is here to stay.
I've read also that Amy Coney Barrett has, in the past, argued that Obergefell is different than Roe v. Wade, which was overturned, of course. But she argued that, people have sort of trusted Obergefell and made decisions in terms of getting, quote unquote, married to their same-sex partners based on that. And they have trusted that the federal government would uphold this. So seems to me a very much a utilitarian sort of argument in saying, well, the government kind of said that this would stand, the same-sex marriage, so we can't really take it back. But shouldn't the truth of what is what marriage is stand over some utilitarian considerations of that some people may have a difficult time now, and that seems to me to be the crux here. And maybe the other reason is that the justices are maybe just afraid. I recently heard Tim Pool, someone on Tim Pool's show, argue that the justices would have to fear for their life if they overturned if they overturned Obergefell and gave same-sex marriage legalization back to the states. What do you think about that, Wade?
Of course, the main story within the story here is that the case was dismissed with no comment. So no judge wanted to put their name on why they're not even hearing the case. And so it's sort of, what a failure. It's complete moral cowardice to not even offer up a justification for why we have to live under this ruling. So, of course, I'm sure, of course, the real reasoning is that they find overturning gay marriage to be not politically expedient. That is to say that if they were to overturn gay marriage and they were to return it back to the states, then of course the midterms are coming up and liberals would turn out in droves, much in a very similar way that they were animated by the overturning of Roe v. Wade. I'm sure the thinking there is that liberals will turn out in droves in the midterms, sort of as revenge against overturning gay marriage. This has always been the conservative concern, is that we can't do X brave thing. We can't do X stand for truth or stand for justice or anything like that, because think of the next election. We can't be too conservative and we can't be too openly conservative because the next election is coming up and we don't want to seem less palatable than the standard GOP platform, which is the same platform as the Democrats, but from 10 years ago. And of course, this is made worse by the fact that now there are several gay Republicans who have a lot of influence and power within the party. This is referred to by a lot as the Alphabet Mafia, which is, headed by figures like Rick Grinnell and the Log Cabin Republicans, who before Trump didn't really have a lot of influence in the party, but unfortunately because of Trump, who was really the first mainstream Republican presidential candidate to support gay marriage, even back in 2016, there are infamous photos of him holding up gay pride flag that has gays for Trump scribbled on it. These people have gained influence in the party as a result of this. And so, of course, back then the strategy was to focus on immigration and trade and not so much social conservatism. But unfortunately, when you give up your standing on that, when you backtrack and concede to the left, when you concede ground on issues like social conservatism, then you never really get that ground back. And now it seems to be the consensus, unfortunately, on the left and the right, that this is acceptable, that gay marriage is something that can't really be trampled on, that can't be revoked. And I think it goes to show really how cowardly mainstream conservatives have gone. We're not even getting like a justification as for why this ruling, isn't being decided on the way that we would like it to. So I think it's a huge failure.
It seems to me that this means that it's not going to be overturned for the foreseeable future. Because if they're not hearing this case, why would this court in this composition right now hear another case in 3 or 4 years? Seems to me unlikely. So that sort of means that we probably, for another decade or so, cannot expect Obergefell to overturn.
Absolutely. And it's not just about gay marriage as well. The concern back then, when social conservatives were warning against the legalization of gay marriage by the Supreme Court, the counter argument was always, it's never going to lead to such and such things. It's never going to lead to the normalization of polygamy. It's never going to lead to Christians being censored for their beliefs. It's never going to lead to even more morally repugnant things such as transgenderism or pedophilia being normalized. And of course, almost all of those things did happen since the legalization of gay marriage. And I spoke about this on the last episode a little. Transgenderism did become normal, and it did follow directly after gay marriage. The argument from social conservatives was that, legalizing gay marriage is a slippery slope. And not only is it wrong on its own merits, of course, gay marriage is not marriage. Marriage is between a man and a woman as designed by God, and it shouldn't be any other way. It's a mockery and an abomination of marriage. But now you even have people that are welcomed in the Republican Party, like Dave Rubin, who is married to another man, and they have 2 children. In other words, they've stolen 2 children from a mother, and through surrogacy, and they basically purchased 2 children. But here's the thing: purchasing children does not actually make you a father, right? Being in a relationship with another man and just purchasing kids, that doesn't actually replace the role of a mother in the family. It says a lot that someone like this has been welcomed into conservative circles, while social conservatives have been pushed out. It's harder nowadays to stand against gay marriage and to be a strong social conservative in the Republican Party. It's harder to be that and expect opportunities, media opportunities or speaking opportunities in the conservative movement. It's harder to hold that position than to go the other way and just straight up be a gay man who is purchasing children through surrogacy. That's something that should be condemned by the Republican Party. Like, why is that acceptable in the so-called conservative movement? It was Marco Rubio himself who said back in the day that we are on the water's edge of mainstream Christian teaching being considered hate speech. And that is true. We have seen Christians being censored, attacked, and ridiculed for mainstream biblical teaching, which is that marriage is between one man and one woman. And so on all these arguments where social conservatives back then made the arguments that legalizing gay marriage is going to lead to this, this, and this, all of those things have actually occurred. And the question now is, how much farther is this willing to go before conservatives finally take a stand together, united as a party, and say we're not going to let this go on any longer?
Wade brought up Dave Rubin because it reminds me of a 2017 interview that Rubin did with actually Bishop Barron, who's a very well-known apologist for many things today. Rubin asked Bishop Barron, what was your response to the Obergefell ruling? And Rubin said, "I assume you felt it was a wrong decision by the court." It's a direct quote. Here's what Bishop Barron responded. "I do, but I don't think I want to press it further," he said. "I think with where we are at now in the United States, I'll apply the Aquinas principle. I think it would probably cause much more problems and dissension and difficulty if we keep pressing it. I wouldn't want to get on a crusader's tank and try to reverse that decision." So something to keep in mind there, that really what the court here did was something that Bishop Barron called for over 8 years ago.
And that's, from the Catholic Church, who should most fervently defend marriage, even more than conservative Christian politicians should. And or for one representative in that case. It's a big problem that there's no pushback anymore on this issue. It just kind of has been accepted, and all the premises that come with it. Other news, the BBC was caught red-handed, essentially, and a scandal that actually should have been a scandal even, or was a scandal in a way, a year ago, because it all began in 2024 when the BBC aired a documentary about the US elections in which they played a speech from President Trump from January 6, 2021, but it wasn't the original speech. It was a speech where they spliced 2 parts of the speech together in a way that made it seem like he directly called for violence. An internal memo was leaked from the BBC last week, from the Telegraph, and that now kind of warmed up the story again, caused a big scandal. Many politicians reacted to it. And now the leadership of the BBC resigned. So it was BBC Director General Tim Davie and new CEO Deborah Turness. They announced their resignation on November 9th over all of this. This is really a gigantic scandal. I mean, we can play a clip of what the original speech of President Trump says and the doctored version that the BBC aired in 2024. Watch this.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and I'll be there with you, and we fight. We fight like hell. We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women.
They took 2 parts of the speech and put it together in a way that it seemed like he called for violence, and they made him responsible for the January 6th riots in that way. And conveniently, they just cut out the part where he told his supporters to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. So he absolutely said that they should remain peaceful. And the BBC just completely botched that. And that's just another level of completely throwing your journalistic integrity out the window. It's not just that you follow the narrative and that you maybe leave out certain facts. I mean, this is straight out doctoring a tape to make it seem like Trump said something that he didn't do. So, I mean, it's a huge scandal. And now I think what will happen is they will say, oh, we resigned, so the BBC will reform itself and become, unbiased now again and go back to its journalistic integrity. But in my view, that's just not going to happen, because most people who work there they follow this left-wing ideology, and this will, in my view, may not change too much on the long run, but it just gives conservatives and everyone critical of the mainstream media a great example to point to and say, this is actually the fake news media. So the term that Trump gave them is absolutely accurate, and no one can really come at Trump for engaging in fake news or whatever. And even if he does, he can always point to this is just, it's absolutely outrageous.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's obvious that the BBC is part of the global deep state apparatus that's trying to push a lot of agendas which are antithetical to Christianity and biblical moral teachings. And it was President Nixon who I think had this right many years ago, that the media is the enemy. And the BBC actually, is this really surprising? No, because in fact, not long ago, that outlet in particular rebuked a anchor who was on air, and the teleprompter instructed her to use the term pregnant people. Okay. And the person, to her great credit, the woman, used the term woman instead, because she was rejecting woke language there. So kudos to her, but obviously shame on the BBC for following down this path of wokeism and pushing gender ideology. But again, the media that operates this way, and it has done for many years with President Trump. You'll recall actually in December of 2024, there was a settlement for the situation involving the president and George Stephanopoulos. He was obviously a former Democratic operative, longtime Clinton aide, who now parades around as an anchor for ABC News. And they settled a defamation lawsuit because Stephanopoulos had an inaccurate allegation claiming that the president had been found civilly liable for violating E. Jean Carroll, a woman who was accusing him of certain things. And the settlement involved a $15 million payment from ABC to President Trump's future presidential library. So, this sort of stuff goes unreported often, again, by the media. But, we're not forgetting it. And again, this is how they've been operating for many years.
And this goes to show why no one really trusts the media anymore. Trust in the mainstream media is at an all-time low. People are turning towards influencers, these sort of like solo shows, like InFocus or Matt Walsh or Michael Knowles or Tim Pool, any collection of them. People are turning towards individuals, really, and influencers for their news, and of course they're all on social media. Especially during the Biden presidency, people were told really not to trust their own eyes and ears. We were told by the mainstream media for literally years that Biden's health was fine, that there was nothing to worry about. And then it's like every speech, this guy barely even knows where he is. Like that was the joke for 4 years that conservatives would tell, is that, look at how far gone this guy is. He's like completely out to lunch. And the media's like, nope, this is the most competent president we've actually ever had, luckily. And so, people have basically learned that the media can no longer be trusted. And with this specific example, it's like anyone who actually watched Trump's January 6th speech knows that there was no call for violence within the speech or anything like that. But of course, the media is going to clip it up and paint it a certain way to fit their narrative. And yeah, when you chop up Trump's speech and you construct your own sentences based off of words Trump is using, then yeah, you can make him say basically whatever you want. And so I think, of course, BBC is going to accept the resignations of these particular people, kind of to give the right a scalp. But I don't think this is going to change anything within that network. I don't think this is going to change the attitudes within the mainstream media at all. And I think they're going to continue to decline. And I think that'll be a good thing, because at least with these individuals that people are following now for their news, it's much easier to say, X person was wrong about this issue. But with these media networks, it's sort of like a faceless, like no one really knows who owns them. It's a huge collection of individuals that decide what is to be reported on that day. And so I think it's much easier to hold this new media accountable. The new media I'm referring to, of course, is the influencer class. So I think it's actually a good development. Really what the media is conceding here is that they do lie about certain things. We were told for years that they don't. And no one really seemed to think through why they wouldn't. Of course, the media has an agenda. The people working at these media companies have political opinions. They want to push a certain agenda. The media hated Trump since 2015, and even before that. And so, of course, they're going to get away with whatever they think they can. Like when Hillary Clinton collapsed in 2016, I believe it was on 9/11, the media completely hid that clip from all networking programs, of her collapsing into the van, and her staff had to basically drag her into the van. That led to a lot of questions about her health. But if you weren't on social media, you wouldn't have seen it, because news programs passed it off as a conspiracy. It was hot that day or something. And they've been doing things like that for years. And this is just one of the things that they were finally caught on and that they had to answer to. But this is not the only instance where the media has done similar things, where they've cut up speeches or where they've just flat out lied about events. And so I think people are finally starting to catch on, and I think the rubber is meeting the road for the media, because people don't believe the mainstream media anymore. Every time they lie, it's getting caught more and more. And so I think they're able to get away with much less, and people aren't even really watching anymore. CNN has record low viewership. MSNBC has record low viewership. Their flagship host, Mehdi Hassan, his show was canceled because no one watches it. And so I think it just goes to show that the landscape in media has completely changed.
Yeah, my hope is also that just with every one of these big scandals, they're chipping away at their own trust that people have in them, and that's I think really a good thing, but because I think they're absolutely not trustworthy. And with these individuals, and even with with outlets like LifeSite News or with individual influencers, like you said, they at least they go out there like LifeSite does, and we say, oh no, we do stand for something. This is our position. This is the way we see the world. And we're going to report, through that lens, in a sense. And I mean, everyone does that. It's impossible not to do it because we're human beings and that's how we work. The problem with the media is that they, for so long, have claimed and still claim that they're this unbiased institution that's just reporting the news without any agenda or ideology behind it. And that's just bogus. And, with influencers or, alternative media, you can at least say, okay, this outlet or this person is reporting from this perspective, and I can decide for myself, do I believe that or do I not believe that? And I can check the sources or whatever. And, but I don't think any of these influencers, like you said, is really claiming, oh, I'm the unbiased mediator of truth like the mainstream media is. And it's a very good thing that this is hopefully coming to an end soon.
And I think that was one of the best developments of with the rise of Trump, because Trump coined the term fake news, but he didn't invent it. That was actually created by Mark Zuckerberg, and he was describing posts on Facebook that were fake news stories or whatever. Facebook would describe those as fake news, and Trump really just took that term and weaponized it against the mainstream media. Obviously Trump has his popularity has declined recently, especially among conservatives. But, I think really one of the best developments of his sort of rise to power has been that he completely dismantled the media and their control over what people think and over how people digest information. And I think without that, if we lived in a climate where people still trust what CNN reports, I think we would have a totally different political landscape. And so I think that was certainly one of the best developments in the last 10 years, has been the mainstream media trust is at an all-time low.
we have another story about Gen Z, about a new poll that shows that 25% of young people believe it's okay, or it can be justified in some cases, to use political violence. And on college campuses, it's even worse. 1 in 3, 1/3 believe that it's okay to use political violence sometimes, for instance, if a speaker is there that they do not agree with. So this goes into what we have talked to before, that this ideology, or this idea that you can just, violently oppose those who you disagree with, that ultimately led to the killing of Charlie Kirk, seems to be widespread, especially on college campuses.
Yeah, I think we've seen this actually bear itself out. I mean, if you look over the last several years, speakers like Riley Gaines, who's fighting against transgender athletes in women's sports, as well as even Charles Murray, who's a scholar who's written about race issues, they've literally been detained and had stuff basically thrown at them in these halls where they have nowhere to go. And so the campus police have had to actually come and basically save them from the violent mob that was basically going to start something. Obviously, colleges at this point in time in this country's history are nothing more than a morally corrupting and debt-enslaving institution that is trying to really indoctrinate the youth with leftist ideology. They don't really serve much of a great purpose anymore. It's very difficult to find a good university anymore and to actually get training and education that will lead to a happier and more wholesome and productive life. Most of these institutions, again, are run by feminists, leftists, Marxists, and communists. And they're trying to promote an array of errors that go against the Christian religion. And so that's the general attitude that I have towards the situation. I'm sure Wade has some views on that as well.
It points to a larger trend of radicalization among both sides with my generation. If you're on the right as a Gen Z person, but it's usually the males that are on the right, we've seen them become much more right-wing with time. But the thing is, that is also true with the left. We celebrate that Gen Z men are becoming more conservative, and especially so. But on the left, they're becoming more radical as well. And so, for example, with Charlie Kirk's assassination, it wasn't like crazy liberals who were celebrating this. It wasn't the fringes of the furthest left, like the absolute most radical people on the left who were celebrating this. We saw how big the celebration of Kirk's death was on social media, and I think everyone realized that, especially among Gen Z, it's just like your average liberal who sees that and celebrates. And of course, this is because the sides have now become irreconcilable. Where 100 years ago, the difference between Democrats and Republicans was like they have different tax policies or something. Now it's like completely different worldviews that are diametrically opposed. There's absolutely no common ground. And so I think one side is basically correctly recognizing that there is no way to really come together on these issues, and it's either one side wins or the other at this point. And of course, violence is wrong, but one side is sort of recognizing that, if that's how the situation is, that the left is either going to win or lose, then from their perspective, why not try to win at all costs? And so that's why you're seeing assassination attempts of Trump. That's why you saw the assassination of Charlie Kirk, is because the left, especially the younger left, which is more radical and more angry, they're recognizing that, if the right is beginning to win cultural cachet and they're beginning to win in a political sense, where Trump is now the president and the Republicans control the House and the Senate, then if you're on the left, that's sort of how they're reaching this conclusion that violence is necessary.
Thanks for watching InFocus. God bless, and we'll see you next week.
Aloha everyone, this is Jason Jones for LifeSite News. We hope you enjoyed this video. For more content like this, check the link in the description. You can also connect with us on social media to stay up to date with the latest news on life, faith, family, and freedom. Thanks for watching, and may God bless you.